Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Talking Crap podcast. It's a big one. And so all three of us are here. I'm the host, Lucas Jackson, joined by my lovely co-host, regularly co-host, Jay Josh Porter, and Champagne Charlie, as you remember from the Viewpoint and Gorilla Press. And today is our Attitude Era episode. We're talking about the wild and weird things that happen in the Attitude Era, including Crash TV, and I'm about to swear, so please get the censor button ready. We're going to be discussing Vince Russo. Yes, and joining us is a man who was there living it all back in the Attitude Era as Just Joe. He wrestled in TNA, wrestled in Japan, and of course over here for LDN Wrestling and All Star Promotions. And yeah, he's just been wrestling for about 25 years. So he's definitely our most tenured guests in wrestling, and we are looking forward to this. Please welcome to the podcast, to the Talking Crap land, Joe E. Legend. So thanks for joining us, Joe. Obviously, Attitude Era star yourself towards the end part of the era, the boom in wrestling. And we're talking about the weird side of it now. We've spoken a lot about the tag team stuff, but we're going to start with talking about Crash TV. Right. That was a format and presentation format that was brought in by someone whose name doesn't get mentioned in a good light often in wrestling, by Vince Russo.
Yeah.
So when talking and thinking about Crash TV, is it something that is limited to that time period, do you think? Like, was it only going to really work then? Because obviously WWE, they do try things now, but it doesn't really have the same effect. But back then, people ate that up, didn't they? Like, all these angles and turns and craziness. So what do you think?
Well, I think it was something that kind of hit at the right time. It came around. I mean, like, I don't shit on Russo as much as everybody else. I like Vince. I don't agree with him on a lot of stuff. But I think he did have the best intentions at heart. I don't think he was out there just trying to kind of ego play himself. But I mean, he put his, the Crash TV style out at, the same time Jerry Springer was a big deal. The same time all those talk shows were a big deal. So he was kind of, I don't know, navigating the waters of that fad. It worked out ideally. And if you notice the structure of how the business is run, from before that till now, what happened was like in the 80s, kids got into it, and they did cereal and cartoons and all that stuff. And then as they grew older, it became silly for that fan base. It's like, look at this. Come on, it's goofy and silly. So then they start having a more edgy Crash TV product, and all of a sudden, they're fans again. And it runs to a certain level till it finally gets goes too far, where eventually it becomes almost pornographic. The violence gets too strong, it becomes too dangerous for the talent. And as it gets to a certain point, because I know Jim Cornette craps on it all the time.
Yeah, a lot.
But yeah,
constantly.
And I love listening to him. He's hilarious.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, I do agree with him to a certain extent, is that, if it's constant shock value, eventually whatever is shock value becomes commonplace. So you have to do something even more shocking, even more shocking.
Yeah.
I was talking to a couple of guys about like the Hell in the Cell thing. Like, the idea of the cell is a cage match with a roof on it, so you can't get out. You're stuck in the bastard cage, and nobody can leave, and the good guy's going to kick the hell out of the bad guy. And now, because of the Mick Foley bump with Taker off the top, now if you were to watch a cage, this Hell in a Cell match now, and you didn't see somebody fall off the top of the cage, you'd feel ripped off. So they, in turn, you're taking. If I'm a promoter, if I'm Vince McMahon, I'm like, well, I want to put somebody I really want to push in this cage match. Clearly, because it's an event match, it's going to be one of the top matches on one of my pay-per-views. I'm going to want to put one of my top guys in there, but I'm also going to take one of my top guys who I want to put, strap a rocket to their ass and send him to the moon, and I'm putting him in a position where he's going to potentially really hurt himself, if not die, in trying to up the ante from the last one. Russo took the Crash TV idea and moved it along nicely. The audience came along nicely and matured with the product. Then it got to a certain level where it just couldn't really mature anymore without losing advertisers, especially because girls kept losing their tops and giving birth to hands and all this bullshit. But in turn, it got to a certain level where your advertisers are going to back away. So what do? They go to the PG era, and everybody goes, this is bullshit. It's all kiddie stuff. But what's happened is that the kids the first people who were kids in the 80s are now grown up and they're having kids. So their kids are going to watch the kiddie product. And now watch, as we've moved away from the PG era and move forward, those kids are getting older and the product's getting more mature. And it's just going to kind of go through that cycle over and over again, I believe, where you get to a certain level and then those kids grow up and then you got to bring it back to the kiddie product because your audience is having kids now.
Yeah.
They're going to want to share the joy that they had watching wrestling with their kids.
I guess as well, like with people obviously having kids younger throughout the last kind of 30 years, the age of a parent's gone down. The gaps are getting closer because obviously.
Oh, stop crapping on Norwich. Gee whiz.
It's not just Norwich. It's a lot of the UK, to be fair. But Champagne Shire then, so Crash TV and Vince Russo. What are your thoughts then?
Well, here's the thing, Vince. There's been this thing about Vince Russo of trying to bring it into more kind of a Hollywood TV kind of aspect when it came to how to write a show. You mentioned the Jerry Springer show a few minutes ago. It's been reported that Vince Russo would sit there and write the format for Raw whilst watching the Jerry Springer show.
Which wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, and you mentioned some of the far-fetched things that were happening. You were getting old biddies giving birth to hands and people being crucified on crosses, that kind of thing. Were you ever yourself, though, presented an angle backstage whilst you were working with WWF and thinking to yourself, what the fuck have they been smoking whilst writing or something like that?
I remember the crucifixion angle that came up, and I was like, they did this in ECW with a crucified Sandman, barbed wire crown stuff. Well, yeah, like because Kurt Angle was backstage, and Kurt Angle lost his shit and told him like this is completely sacrilegious, and you better go out there and apologize. So, I mean, Raven's one who told me that. He said like Paul Lee was kind of happy with it, but they, all right, we'll keep Kurt happy. So Kurt's the one who put his foot down and said that's too far. And in turn, that might be a bit too far for all intents and purposes. So I was surprised that WWE did that. And they made the solid point of making sure that Austin was crucified on the Undertaker symbol and not on a cross.
Yeah.
I mean, it's basically the same thing, but they changed it enough that they could keep the religious types who are particularly pious from losing their mind and starting to scream at advertisers to pull their money. So WWF, or it was WWF at the time, they handled it as correctly as they could. At the same time, like maybe I lean towards the Cornette mindset more so than others, but I like more realism in it. I like the supernatural stuff. I mean, I like Undertaker, or when Kane drops his arms and the corners explode and stuff like that. That is nifty. And when Undertaker comes out and there's a lightning storm and like his ring entrance, even though I was never really a big fan of the Taker gimmick because it was too I don't know, phony for me. Even though it worked out well, I can't argue with the success of it. It's just I wasn't one of the people buying a ticket to see it. But if I was running the company, I definitely, do what you want to do. It's obviously working. I was more of a traditionalist where I thought this stuff is too far. It's getting away from, it was supposed to look like an athletic contest between the best in the world. And now it's, the fighting the forces of darkness and there's going to be demons coming through and people getting fireballed. And then, they eventually killed Vince for a week until, Benoit did the horrible thing. And then they had to pull the plug on that. But it makes me wonder how far were they going to go with the Vince thing? Because I heard that TNA recently, or Impact, whatever they call themselves now, they've killed like 3 people on that show. They had a wedding and somebody got shot. And
don't even get me started on TNA.
Right. Like I don't want to crap on them because
out recently. So
I have friends there. They have some really talented performers there, but that's the angles are something that I'm not particularly in agreement with. And I think they have guys like Shelley and Sabin there. Like to me, the Motor City's okay. I'm a little bit biased because I helped with their training and stuff like that. But at the same time, I think they might be the best team in the business. When they're on point, they are on point.
Yeah. So Josh, coming to you, like obviously in terms of Crash TV, like, do you think that there's been any angles more recently? I know you're more of a recent fan, where you think it's gone too far, or just too silly.
I definitely think the whole Wrestle House thing at Impact Wrestling they did recently for their lockdown thing. So some of the moments were quite good, but the whole concept behind the Wrestle House. I can't remember what it was called now. I think it was Wrestler's House or something.
What is it?
Wrestling. So the whole concept for it was, it's kind of what would happen if wrestlers had to isolate together.
Okay.
Kind of thing. Like, how would they settle
like,
their
like a wrestler's version of Big Brother, if you will.
Kind of, yeah.
Didn't WWE do that with Patterson and Piper and a whole
Legends
bunch of
House.
Legend,
House.
that's the one. Oh, I should fucking know that name, shouldn't
Yeah, no.
Because I'm falling behind.
Yeah.
Well, but
Is
is
that the same
Impact's
thing?
one?
Yeah.
Is Impact's one? Is it real? Like, is it part of the Impact?
No, it's a sketch. It's a sketch show.
It was
Oh,
more
it's
of a
all
it was more of a
actors.
comedic level,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I say comedy in the loosest term, anyway. So, but
They had some
is it
good
shown
matches
on
on it,
Impact?
though. Yes, it was shown on Impact. While they
so
weren't, they did that because they were struggling to record actual shows at the time.
Difficult content, yeah.
Yeah, they thought this is a good alternative. And in fairness, it filled a gap and it got more fans in. But at the same time, I was sitting there thinking, this is utterly ridiculous. Like, you've got all this talent and you're wasting them on comedy sketches.
oh god.
I think everybody's gotten a bit desperate, though. I mean, at the last Mania, the Boneyard match turned out to be kind of an action movie. So it's like, okay, I get it. It's not really once again, I want to see in a ring, two guys fighting, yada, yada. But at the same time, all right, well, that made it a little bit different, made it a little special for Mania. But the Firefly Funhouse thing, like, to me, that's way too absurd. Like, to have John Cena walk around talking to puppets and and not say choking the guy who's holding the puppet to find out where Bray Wyatt is. Like, stuff like that, I just think they've gone too far in such a nonsensical direction that I think it does turn a lot of fans off. Like, I think the wrestling's got to be at a certain position, at least for me anyways, is that, okay, I know it's rigged. I get it. But show me something that I can get behind, and I don't mind shutting off my critical thinking in that regard for 3 hours. Lie to me for 3 hours, but don't make me feel like an asshole. Don't lie to me to such a fucking degree that I feel like an asshole for being lied to. I don't want to feel like a dupe. I want to feel like, oh, you led me along like in a movie.
One of my housemates has just recently started showing an interest in watching wrestling, and he's a good guy, but he's into like smoking pot, that kind of thing. Imagine me showing him that match while he's skilling up for a joint. He's like, "Fucking hell!" Yeah.
I love sports.
I mean, we mentioned wrestling getting silly, but I mean, now obviously it has had this silliness, especially in lockdown. But I mean, you'd argue in Attitude Era, like, a lot of the comedy characters are the ones that stood out, though. And there's a reason potentially why we are where we're at. Because when people mention Attitude Era, once you get past the big names, Stone Cold, The Rock, Triple H, Big Show, etc., Goldberg, Sting on the other side, you do end up at going, oh, Val Venus, Crash Holly, Viscera, Al Snow's another one that gets mentioned quite a lot in this stuff. In terms of them adding comic or a different value to the show, didn't that take away from the wrestling side of things too? Because you had guys, obviously, who, generally speaking, were put in spots that weren't necessarily, your traditional, two great wrestlers having a match situation. It was more skits and short matches. Because obviously, when I do watch old pay-per-views and you're watching like a Val Venus match, for instance, I know he's a better worker than that, but he's given maybe 4 minutes, 5 minutes on a pay-per-view of just doing, one routine, which is the same. But do you think guys were limited in ring back then because of obviously having the need to have these characters on top of their original wrestling personas?
Well, the key, I think, ultimately is the philosophy that The Rock and Jericho worked on when he was back being Y2J in WWE. And that is all your ha-has in the promo, but when you're in the ring, it's serious business.
Of course.
And the guys who took the ha-ha into the ring and did the ha-ha in the ring tended to be lower mid-card. Okay,
that
like
makes perfect sense.
Because you could get like a Road Dogg who's hysterical, one of the funniest people I ever met. He is so funny. He's a great guy. If you left him on his own just to do his Road Dogg stuff, he's such a funny guy that he just kind of wants to get a ha-ha in. But throw Billy Gunn into the mix, who's also a pretty funny guy and doesn't get the credit he deserves for being the good worker that he is. He's an unbelievable athlete. But when you combine the two, you had a bit of the ha-ha. Road Dogg was great on the mic, and you had an absolute workhorse in Billy Gunn. So you had the entire entertainment package in just that team. So you could have them go against the Road Warriors and let the Road Warriors be serious, and they could be a little bit silly. But then later on, they could wrestle the Godwins, and the Godwins would be the silly ones. But we could adjust the New Age Outlaws and have them be more serious because we could put more of the focus on Billy Gunn. They were very well rounded as a team, and that was really well handled. When you had a guy like Scotty 2 Hotty, he got the worm over. Like if he had told me, I'm going to do the worm, I'm going to do it every night, I'd be like, you're out of your fucking mind, Scott. It's haha once, but who cares? And then 16 years later, he's still doing the worm. So it worked.
And looks the same as well.
Yeah. And he's just, and to be honest, if he just took the worm away and watched him work, he is a phenomenal worker. He is an excellent worker, but he found a niche that got over. And so the company kept him employed, and he kept doing his worm thing. I would have loved to have seen because he was so good. I'd love to have seen the potential of how far up the card he would have got just on his skill set, because he is so bastard good.
Would you argue that, like someone like Scotty, though, it's poor time? Like they weren't treating the cruiserweights correctly at that time, anyway. Because didn't he have the light heavyweight title for a little bit, didn't he? And
probably.
Then
he was
like very early on.
He was the babysitter for Brian. What's his face there?
Brian Christopher.
Yeah.
Brian Christopher. Yeah.
He was he was kind of the babysitter for him, because he was always kind of a bit of a, for lack of a better term, delinquent of the team. So in turn, Scotty would show up and talk to you about the matches, and Brian would be gone somewhere. And then 5 minutes before the match, Brian walks in and tells you what he wants to do when they go out there. Brian was happy to have a job, and Scotty kept the team grounded to make sure they were always professional in it. He wouldn't let the silliness get too far out of the way in the match. He knew where to put the silly, but where to keep the serious. But because he was team with, I didn't particularly care for the guy. I don't want to speak ill of the dead, that's kind of shitty. Yeah. But at the same time, I don't think that Brian was particularly reliable enough that they could have given them a run with the belts. Yeah,
they tried. They got very over. Don't get me wrong, Tuchel was that. That might be what they added. Do you think that's why they added Rikishi? Maybe they thought, obviously, if obviously Christopher's not going to be reliable. Got Rikishi in there who.
I think they got over to a certain degree, but they also got over to a certain degree at the same time. You had the Edge and Christian, Dudley and Hardy on top, and then you were rolling from that into New Age Outlaws.
Yeah.
So they were over, but you had all these other teams who you could really, do more with. Whereas you had Grandmaster Sexy was somewhat unreliable. He was functional, but he wasn't going to tear the house down. We were always waiting for Scotty to tag in and do his worm and be silly. But also we were always waiting for the silly.
Yeah.
So in turn, I don't know if you could put your tag belts long game on that.
But the thing is, in Crash TV era, this is where, though, some title reigns were like 1 week, 2 weeks kind of thing. They could have won them and lost them, I guess, quite quickly.
I think they did once.
No. Weirdly with Tuchel, it was Scotty Tuchel and Rikishi who won the tag belts in 2004.
I thought that Christopher and him won it once too for like a cup of coffee. I'd have to look it up, but I thought they did.
I'm pretty certain it was Rikishi and
Scotty. I know Tuchel, both Scotty and Brian Christopher, they won the tag titles from Edge and Christian on an episode of Raw, I think, in 2000.
Exactly, and then Edge and Christian got it back quick. Yeah. They got it back right away.
I have a question. With the way things being the way they were during the Attitude Era, a lot of the backstage vignettes and a lot of the comedy things going on, such as there was that backstage VTV thing going on at the time. GTV and the toilet humor and all the other funny vignettes that was going on as well. Were there some people in the locker room who were annoyed with that kind of content taking away from the main product of the actual wrestling, so to speak?
I didn't see anybody too annoyed by it. What I saw was people confused by it. Like we saw GTV, and ultimately, from what I'm told, that was supposed to be Goldust television because he was originally supposed to be.
Oh, right.
He was supposed to be like an Oscar. He was done up like an Oscar statue. That's why he was all golded up.
Yeah.
And then they turned the thing all androgynous and such. But initially, he was supposed to be something to do with Hollywood. When you see the original vignettes, he's sitting in a cinema watching old movies and then talking. And his promos like that. So that was supposed to be him making backstage videos of all these wrestlers and what they're up to. But then when it changed to androgynous, we were like, well, what does GTV mean? And people were getting impatient with like, well, could they get on with it and have a point? And also, we were also kind of like, well, we have backstage vignettes where, one guy's talking to another guy and a third guy walks in and they start talking just magically. They're all sitting there with, a cup of coffee talking bullshit. But then GTV, how is that different? It's just a black and white version of the same thing.
Yeah.
So it wasn't any different. Like the thing that bothered me the most of anything where I was like, okay, there's a problem with the direction was when Jericho was backstage and he was drinking a coffee and Kane bumped into him and he spilled coffee on him.
Yeah, I remember this.
He's like,
I remember
fuck you,
this.
you're dead. And then they were going to go fight. And the amount of shit that was wrong with that. Like, number one, Chris Jericho and Kane were both backstage, not booked apparently, but both in their wrestling gear. That fucking bothered me.
There's the attention to detail, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Number two, apparently there was, they've been running this live TV show for years, but magically they had a 10-minute block that nothing was booked for. Thank fuck Jericho bumped into Kane. So we could fill that spot, or it just would have been dead air for 10 minutes. Like, to me, that was ridiculous. Number three, Kane was, at the time, burnt to, disgusting in a mausoleum fire, but he's going to be sad that he got coffee on his jammies. And number four,
it was an absurd thing.
They're both former world champions. You can't sell a match off the fact that here's two former world champions, that you have to throw a cup of coffee into the mix. When I saw that, I thought, this is so devaluing everything that these guys bring to the table, but also devaluing what the audience can expect from the product. I thought that was really just a weak way. Oh, we got to get these two together. How do we do it? Well, how about two former world champions trying to get in contention for the belt? Put some value on the belt. And instead it was, the battle for Folgers crystals or some stupid shit.
So it's because the storyline itself was so fucking petty, that kind of thing.
Well, they got desperate looking for reasons for guys to wrestle. How about your wrestlers at a wrestling show?
Yeah, and the thing is, this stuff has continued long into this era too. You see, and obviously you mentioned something. The promos and gears thing really, really grinds my gears, and a lot of people obviously at DK, when I mention it, they don't understand. But I'm just like, why would you be? Think of any other sport. Think any other sport you can think of. Like you think of boxing, for instance. Okay, that is real. We get that it's real. Anthony Joshua doesn't walk around in his boxing gear when he's not got a fight. Like,
exactly.
Randy Orton he drove me crazy with this when he was world champion every week in the 2000s when he was champion, and he'd come out in his gear at the start of the night as a villain, and he would then be surprised when he's got his gear on when a babyface walks down to a match that night. It's like, but you've got your gear on. Like, surely
you're ready to go. Yeah.
And not just Randy Orton, Chris Jericho do the same thing as well.
Yeah.
After
or why are you in the building? Why are you in the building if you're not booked?
Exactly.
Yeah, but they actually started this obsession with this obsession that people come down and they're always ready for a fight kind of thing, I guess. Coming to you, Josh. We're going to move on and talk about tag team stuff, and obviously this is something you mentioned about Moxley Machine Gun, and obviously the tag team era at this time actually gets a lot. People do kind of agree, into WWE at least, because obviously Impact, AEW now, and Japan, obviously, they focus a lot on tag team wrestling. They do agree this was like the last good era of tag team wrestling. Edge and Christian, Hardys, Dudleys, and lower than that, obviously, people like APA and Tuchel that you mentioned, obviously, on but they were still like top kind of tag teams. Do you think that the business could ever get back to having that many good tag teams, or has it already, do you reckon?
I think if it hasn't already, it will be within the next 2 years at most. Because you've got to think, since kind of the end of the Attitude Era, tag team wrestling was kind of in and out. Like, we had so many good tag teams, like Motor City Machine Guns, Young Bucks. Well, they were Generation Me at the time. Anyone in Japan, really. But even the Hardy Boys were still floating around from time to time. Plus, you had Beer Money. All of the good tag teams, I think, were in TNA. Now a lot of them are in AEW or Japan. But no, I genuinely think tag team wrestling will be making a comeback within the next, probably this year, at best. But
do you think that it's this guy's already really? Do you think that if WWE don't focus on it, that it can still become big, because obviously the big tag team, every time I think of big tag teams, you go back first to the 80s, where you're looking at, again, Heart Foundation, Demolition, Road Warriors, etc. Then you're coming to this period actually where it was, Edge, Christian, Dudley, etc. But if WWE at the moment, like, they're not really interested in a tag division outside the New Day because they ship merchandise, like, is it possible that another company would be able to go, okay, right, we're going to put it at the front of our division, of our product, and we're going to make tag team wrestling big? Is it possible without the WWE jumping on that bandwagon? Because they're clearly not going to.
I definitely think so, because AEW have already said they want to focus on tag team wrestling.
Same question to you, Joe. Do you think that we're going to see,
I think they're going to have to.
Tag era?
I think they're going to have to. I mean, I know Vince isn't big. He doesn't like tag teams, not because he thinks tag team wrestling is shit or anything like that, but he likes to sell individual merchandise, right? He likes everybody to be their own character. When you have 4 guys in one match, you're losing a couple of the characters. That's why a lot of the tag team champions are like thrown together teams just long enough so they can break up and have a singles match later. Right? I mean, Austin and Michaels did it, and Taker did it with everybody. Kane tagged and hated everybody. But the thing is that the product has moved to such a fast pace, and largely off the back of Austin. Austin was always 100 miles an hour. If you watch his matches, he started every match in the comeback.
Yeah.
And then he started the comeback, and then it was false finishes for a while, and then they went into the finish. That was an Austin match. They didn't really grab a lot of holds. When Austin grabbed holds, he was mid-card. When he stopped grabbing holds and was just blunt trauma, he was a main event. And they've tried to keep everything at such a fast pace. But such a fast pace is tremendously difficult on your stars' bodies. So right now, the stars are getting a break because the lockdowns have less shows. People aren't doing live events. I heard they don't even want to go back to live events once things open up again. They're so happy with how things go now. But if they go back to live events, your top talent can't maintain that pace for a length of time without injuries. Look at Austin's knees. Look at Undertaker's entire body. Fucked up. He just didn't grab a lot of holds. It was move, 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 move. So the best way to accomplish a move, you have a guy like Undertaker who's beating his body up trying to keep things going. A tag team match can keep things moving at 100 miles an hour because you can tag in and out and give guys a break on the apron. It also protects big moves. People want to see big moves. And it's fair enough. I mean, shoot, whenever I'm teaching wrestling classes, the guys all want to learn power bomb, pile driver, monster moves off the top rope. But the trouble is in a singles match, you got to keep having guys kick out of those, which means you burn the move, which means the move's got to get that much more dangerous. So now it isn't just a shooting star press. Now it's a shooting star press through a table that's on fire into a bucket of hospital syringes and ill-tempered piranha. It's got to keep getting worse and worse and worse. But with a tag match, you can hit the big move and then somebody makes the save. Somebody distracts the ref. It's more valuable than, say, having just a manager there to draw the ref, because there's only so many times that you can do that before the heat goes on the ref for constantly being distracted by somebody who isn't really in the match. But if it's a tag match, the referee can legitimately get distracted by guys running in and breaking up pins. So I think it can definitely, just to keep the attention span of the fan going, because they're moving the business and the matches at such a pace that if you want to have a main event of any length of time, it's hard to keep guys going 100 miles an hour on that and be believable and not burn moves. So tag matches are the way to put a Band-Aid on that.
Yeah, no, I respect the answer. Same to you then, Champion. I know you're a big AEW fan. Like, would you say that obviously with the tag teams, basically the question is, the tag teams that are existing in wrestling now overall, is there enough to challenge that era of tag team wrestling or any other era of strong tag team wrestling?
They are building a great tag team roster over there in AEW currently. The only problem is that this generation of wrestling, particularly in AEW, they're focusing more on the acrobatics and the flips and spills when it comes to wrestling. So it kind of takes away from the traditional tag team wrestling, as it will.
Yeah, however, too much choreography.
Yeah. However, you do get wrestlers such as FTR currently, who kind of have that mixture of old and new mentality. You know what I mean? Because
they're good.
There was this constant thing of, they remind us of Tully and Arn, that kind of thing. And now they've got Tully Blanchard in their corner. So it's that nice mixture of vintage wrestling and current wrestling as well, if you catch my drift.
No, I get you. I get that.
I think they also need a couple of monster teams.
I
It
would agree
seems
with
all
you
the
there.
teams they're putting together are smaller guys, which means the tag matches wind up being kind of all the same.
I would agree with you on that part. Yeah,
I'm not saying they have to be Road Warriors or who are the Authors of Pain. They don't have to necessarily be one-dimensional like that. But a couple of good monsters for some smaller baby faces to overcome would be exceptional in the storytelling.
Well, I think that's why I'd argue that obviously in WWE they have, when they needed that, they obviously turned to Kane and Big Show and Undertaker, etc. to all kind of, they've all been at some point teams together. But obviously now, obviously, like it'd be nice to have. I agree. It'd be nice to have, because obviously everyone that's coming into it is doing the flips and the moves. It'd be nice to have two big guys who don't dive as well. Big guys should not dive. It pisses me off. Like have
Brody
two big
Hansen.
guys who are just like, look, we're gonna be big guys and we're gonna beat people up, and that's literally our thing. You need, or even like a team. I mean, FTR are very much like the Brainbusters, that kind of ilk. To have another team like them, I guess, that come from a similar angle too. But I think obviously, WWE are missing that.
The thing is, they can give the impression of it. Done.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, this day you see just flip, 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 flip. So
I agree. It's too much. Not to mention the heels are doing cooler moves than the baby faces half the time. So people stop booing the bad guys as much. They start cheering the bad guys. And that's partially, I mean, at least WWE, that's part of the corporate problem with the company, is that they're a merchandise company that uses wrestling to sell merchandise. So what happens is like you get a guy like let's say Kevin Owens, just for argument's sake, right? Kevin Owens shows up. So he starts doing like 450 splashes and stuff. Why? Because he wants the crowd to pop. And when they hear the crowd pop, oh shit, this guy's over. It's not the right pop. We need a heel pop, not a babyface pop. But he's getting over enough that they start buying Kevin Owens merchandise. So they start marching him up the card. And he keeps getting over and he keeps doing babyface stuff. He keeps talking shit on the mic, but he keeps getting over more as a babyface. So that by the time he meets Cena in the main event, you're getting half, let's go Cena, Cena sucks. It's not because Cena's particularly polarizing. It's because people have cheered Kevin Owens on his way to Cena to try and get a shot at the belt. So there's no, when Kevin Owens wins, it's not the monster hooray or the monster boo we want. I mean, if you look at Hogan and Andre at WrestleMania 3, that match alone, just on its face, the undefeated giant against Hulk Hogan, the two biggest stars in the business at that time, that would have sold out the Silver Dome. But they knew that at the end of the match, when somebody wins, we want most of the crowd. You're not getting all the crowd, but we want most of the crowd cheering and leaving happy. So they turned Andre villain to make sure that you get a 90% hooray and not just 50% of people going, oh, fuck, I really wanted Andre to win. Like, boo is significant. But in turn, the boo has to be a proper boo and not just, hi, I'm a dick, but watch all the cool shit I do. The NWO kind of ruined the heel thing where the heels were cooler than the baby faces. And that's got to be stripped away to get to a really valuable heel.
Well, interesting.